Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something pretty cool. Bible preaching, but specifically on the radio. And not just like, your local station, but thinking bigger. Europe, Africa, Asia.
Wow, yeah. Talk about a broad audience. I mean, that's a huge undertaking to even consider reaching people across those different continents.
And that's why I'm so glad we've got these awesome resources to help us unpack all this. We've got a guide here from NXUS International Broadcasting. They do a lot of work in that area.
NXUS, yeah, I've heard of them. They're really well respected in the international broadcasting world.
And then on top of that, we also have some first-hand advice from a UK pastor who's done quite a bit of radio himself. So we've kind of got like the global perspective and the boots on the ground, experience.
Yeah, that's a great mix. It's going to be interesting to see how those two perspectives kind of complement each other.
For sure. Now, one thing that just jumps out at me right away from both of these sources is just how relevant radio still is. We live in this crazy visual world, but this pastor mentions his local DVC station reaches a whopping 131,000 people.
Wow.
That's like 16% of the population.
That's incredible. I mean, you think about all the streaming services and podcasts and everything else out there, but radio is still holding its own.
Totally. And then you get these big national programs, like Radio 4's Sunday Show, that draws in literally millions of listeners. There's just something about the simplicity of radio that still... it just works.
I think you're right. It's like this direct line of communication, just a voice, no distractions. And it can be really powerful, especially when you're talking about reaching people across different cultures and languages.
Yeah, and NEXUS really hits on that.
Yeah.
They talk about the unique opportunity radio presents to connect with people in regions where English might not be the first language. And they're really adamant about, simplifying your language, avoiding all that theological jargon.
Right. It has to be accessible. Right. You can't assume everyone's going to have the same background knowledge.
Exactly. And it's funny because when I was reading that, I immediately thought of this UK pastor's point about being interesting.
Yeah.
He got these really pithy sayings. One that stuck with me was, Jesus wasn't a member of the Labor Party.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would get people's attention. Straight to the point. No messing around.
Right. And it's these little sound bites that are designed to just cut through the noise and stick in your memory.
Makes sense. I mean, radio is such a linear medium. You can't rewind or reread a sentence if it goes over your head. So those concise, impactful summaries are crucial.
Absolutely. And this pastor, he really walks the walk. He tells this story about how he's preparing for a radio debate. And he's doing all this research on Giles Frazier, who's this well-known theologian.
Oh, yeah, I know Giles Frazier. He's always got something interesting to say.
Right. So the pastor's ready for this big theological throwdown. But then get this, his actual debate partner ends up being someone he mostly agrees with.
Oh, what? So all that prep for nothing?
Well, not exactly.
I mean, it sounds like a bit of a letdown. What do you even talk about when you agree with the person you're supposed to be debating?
That's what's so interesting. The pastor had to completely rethink his approach on the fly. He says he ended up drawing on all that research he did on Giles Frazier.
So it wasn't wasted effort after all.
Right. It's even though he wasn't directly debating Frazier's ideas, having that deep dive gave him this broader perspective, this nuance. It allowed him to bring something new to the conversation.
I see. It's you do your homework, you get that foundation, and then you can be a little more flexible in the moment.
Exactly. And it reminded me of something else this pastor emphasizes, being fluent. He's talking about how on radio, time is so limited, there's just no room for all those ums and laters.
Right. You have to be so concise. Every word counts. I mean, I struggle with that sometimes, just trying to get my thoughts out clearly.
Well, and he says, when you're on air, it's all about delivering your message in a clear, compelling way. No rambling.
It's almost like a performance in a way, isn't it? You have to be engaging and hold people's attention.
And that fluency, it goes hand in hand with being concise, we were talking about before. It's this puzzle.
Yeah.
You've got to fit all these important points into a really tight time frame without losing the listener.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. But it sounds like this pastor has got it down to an art.
He does. And it's funny, because then you've got NXUS over here recommending something that seems kind of counterintuitive. They say you should try to incorporate interactive segments.
It's interactive. Yeah. But how do you do that on radio? It's a one-way medium, right?
Exactly. But they're talking about finding ways to make it feel like a dialogue. Maybe inviting questions from listeners or prayer requests. Maybe even using social media to connect with people outside the broadcast.
It's almost like they're trying to bridge that gap between the limitations of the medium and that human desire for connection.
Yeah, it's about finding creative ways to engage people. And that's where the pastor's advice about being concise and fluent becomes even more crucial, right? When you're aiming for that back and forth engagement, you've really got to make every second count.
Absolutely. It makes you think about the whole dynamic of radio in a different light. It's not just about broadcasting, it's about creating a conversation.
It really is, and it makes you think about some of the challenges that come with trying to do this kind of broadcasting on a global scale, right? Because NXUS brings up something that's, well, it's pretty eye-opening. They say that financial support, like from listeners, it might be lower in some regions, especially where folks are facing, economic hardships.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a good reminder that this is, a lot of times this is, mission-driven work. It's not about, big budgets and fancy studios.
And it kind of ties into something the UK pastor talks about. He says it's important to be friendly and colorful in your approach. Like, even though it's radio and you can't, see the person you were talking to, your tone still matters.
Oh, absolutely. You can hear a smile through the radio, It's about that warmth, that genuine connection.
He even jokes about being perfectly happy to tell Giles Fraser that he was speaking a load of rubbish.
Oh, wow. I mean, hopefully he said it respectfully.
Oh, yeah, of course. But it's just funny because it shows he's not afraid to disagree. And it makes him more relatable, more engaging to listeners.
Yeah, it's that authenticity, that willingness to challenge ideas. I mean, respectfully, of course. But he even suggests that, that might be what landed him the radio spot in the first place.
Really?
Yeah. Like, producers were looking for someone who would, stir things up a bit.
That's fascinating. It's a good reminder that sometimes being willing to push back a little it can open doors. It can lead to, deeper, more meaningful conversations.
Totally. It's about being thought-provoking, not just echoing the status quo.
And this goes beyond just disagreements, too. NXCSUS cautions that you might not always get the same level of, enthusiastic feedback you might expect, say, in the U.S. In some cultures, responses might be more reserved. Even something as simple as calling into a radio show or even emailing could be, financially prohibitive for some listeners.
Wow, you really have to think about those things, don't you? It makes you realize how much we take for granted, just in terms of access and affordability.
It does. And it challenges this idea that there's one right way to respond to a spiritual message, Maybe in some cultures, a thoughtful silence speaks volumes.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Sometimes it's the things that aren't said that are the most powerful.
Now, since we're on the topic of, cultural differences, there's another aspect NXUS emphasizes that I think is super important, and that's the importance of promoting interfaith understanding, especially when you're broadcasting to such a diverse audience.
Right, because you're not just speaking to people from one faith background, you're reaching people from all walks of life, different beliefs, different perspectives.
And they really stress the importance of tolerance, respect for other religions. It's about, aiming to create a sense of unity and harmony rather than division.
It's like building bridges instead of walls, even through the airwaves. That's so powerful.
It is. And speaking of building bridges, let's shift gears a bit and talk about content. The UK pastor we've been discussing, he really hammers home this idea of being gospel-centered. He believes that every opportunity, should be used to communicate that core message of Christianity, the good news of Jesus, even if it's just one key takeaway.
Right. It's about making the most of every minute you have on air and not shying away from the heart of the message.
Exactly. And he also talks about being available, being ready to seize those opportunities when they arise, even if it means shuffling things around in your schedule.
Yeah, sometimes you have to be spontaneous, right?
Totally. He mentions that, especially with national broadcasters, things often move really fast, very short notice. So the first person to say yes is often the one who gets the platform.
That makes sense. You have to be ready to jump in when the opportunity presents itself.
And it's not just about being available, it's also about being prepared. He talks about having this notepad filled with scribbled ideas, ready to pull out the right one at the right moment.
Like a mental toolbox.
Yeah. It's interesting how this theme of flexibility keeps coming up, right? It seems like it's just as important as having a perfectly polished message.
I think that's a key takeaway here for sure. You can't control everything. You have to be willing to go with the flow, to listen and respond authentically in the moment.
And that authenticity seems to be another recurring theme, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Whether it's, simplifying your language, being willing to disagree respectfully, or embracing a range of perspectives, it all comes back to being genuine, letting your personality shine through.
Yeah. I think that's what makes the UK pastor's advice so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
He's clearly not afraid to be himself, even if it means, ruffling a few feathers or telling a joke or two.
Exactly. And that kind of authenticity, it's contagious. It draws people in and makes them want to listen. It reminds us that effective communication is not about perfection. It's about connection.
It's about letting your passion and your personality shine through.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's something that transcends any specific medium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's radio, podcasting, or even just having a conversation with a friend.
It's about being human, and that's something we can all relate to.
It really is. And,
Yeah.
as we've been unpacking all these different aspects of effective Bible preaching on the radio, I keep coming back to this idea of finding that sweet spot between preparation and flexibility.
Yeah, that tension between, having a plan and being ready to deviate from it.
Exactly. It's like you need that solid foundation of knowledge, that deep understanding of the message you want to convey, but you also need the ability to adapt.
To kind of riff,
To riff, yeah. To respond to those unexpected turns that a conversation might take, especially in a live setting.
Right, because you never know what a caller might ask or what direction the host might want to take things.
Exactly. And maybe that's the key to making those fleeting moments on the airways
Yeah.
truly count, being so well-versed in your material that you're able to just let go of the script and connect with people on a human level.
It's like that balance between head and heart, right? The knowledge is there, but you're also speaking from a place of genuine passion.
It reminds me of something else NXCUSS brings up, the financial realities of radio broadcasting, especially outside of the U.S.
Yeah, they mentioned that you might not see the same level of financial support you might expect in other regions.
Right, and it's a good reminder that this type of work is often driven by, passion and purpose rather than profits.
Absolutely. It's about reaching people, sharing a message that's important, regardless of the financial return.
It definitely challenges that, that notion that there's a one-size-fits-all approach.
Because different cultures have different ways of, expressing their faith and supporting ministries.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this, the importance of embracing nuance and respecting those differences.
Mm-hmm. Being sensitive to those cultural norms, the financial realities, even just the way people respond to a message.
Yeah, there's no room for assumptions when you're trying to connect with a global audience.
It's about meeting people where they are, both literally and figuratively.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Bible preaching on the radio, I'm left with this sense of awe at the power of this seemingly simple medium to reach across continents and touch hearts.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it, just a voice, a microphone, and yet it can have such a profound impact.
It really can, and it leaves me wondering, what message would you share with the world if you had the chance?
That's a great question.
What truth, what insight, what piece of wisdom would you want to leave ringing in the ears of those tuning in?
Something to think about for sure.
Something to ponder as you go about your day. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
My friend Teddy almost set his house on fire. He used a counterfeit, a fake wall charger. He had to go to the hospital.
Real products are tested for safety. Visit ncpc.org/go for real. Brought to you by NCPC and the USPTO.